Happy New Year! 2023 is officially here and I am super excited for the year to come. But before I get to planning for 2023, I thought I would do a recap of my Single Seed Challenge 2022 that I did last year. The seed that I chose for the Single Seed Challenge was a hollyhock, and hollyhocks are a plant that I had never grown before. Not only had I never grown it from seed before, but I'd also never grown it as a plant in my garden at all. I had zero experience with it. Now I'm going to go through this past season and show my complete journey from seed all the way through the season to the end of the season when the plant finally succumbed to the elements, more or less. If you've never heard of the Single Seed Challenge, it was something that was started by Scott at Black Gumbo Southern Gardening several years ago. And the entire premise of it is that you pick one seed of a plant, you sow it, you nurture it, you really appreciate it throughout the season, and you document the entire process on video. So I actually chose the Single Seed Challenge as the first video that I did on this channel. It kind of gave me that little bit of courage to actually put something out there for everybody else to see. I thought that growing something from seed that I had never grown before was actually the perfect choice for the Single Seed Challenge, because you're paying so much attention to every little thing you do and every step that you take when growing that seed. So it's the perfect opportunity to learn something totally new.
When I was looking through the Baker Creek website, the Majorette Double Champagne Hollyhock really caught my eye. It was gorgeous. It has double blooms in a beautiful creamy color, and it's a dwarf variety that only gets about 2 foot or so tall, so technically you don't really need to stake it. I didn't know really anything about hollyhocks. I do love trying new things though, so I decided to put it in my cart.
When I grow something new, I always do a bunch of research online in addition to whatever happens to be on the seed packet for a particular plant. Now, the problem that I run into not infrequently, I have to say, is that there are often conflicting pieces of information out there in terms of when to sow, how to sow, any type of seed prep that needs to happen. So what I do is I basically look at what everyone has to say, and then I essentially pick and choose what I think sounds reasonable, and I will go ahead and do that. The key is to take a lot of notes when you're doing things, because I don't know about you, but my memory is horrible when it comes to these type of things. 2 months from now, I'm not going to remember exactly what I did when starting that seed, other than probably the very basic elements of it. Now, getting back to the hollyhocks, the Baker Creek packet did not indicate how early to sow the seeds. It did say you could sow them either ahead of time indoors or you can direct seed them outdoors, but it didn't give me any type of range in terms of how early I had to sow those seeds indoors before my last frost date. So I did a bit of online research, and what I came back with was 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost date is a good amount of time to give your hollyhocks a head start. Since I have a shorter growing season, my first frost date is May the 10th. I actually went with the longer time period, the 8 weeks, and I sowed my seeds on March the 13th.
Now, the main bit of differing online advice when sowing hollyhocks involved soaking the seeds. Some sites mentioned soaking it while others didn't, and the Baker Creek packet didn't mention soaking at all. Then, if soaking was recommended, the other difference was the length of time that you had to soak the seed. Some places said you only had to soak it for 1 hour. Other places said 12 hours is what you needed to do. So I decided to soak the seeds for 1 hour, and I used warm water. It was just a little tiny bit warmer than room temperature, and I figured I would just see how it goes. For the soil mix, I used ProMix HP, which is a seed starting mix. Now, I mixed some water into the soil so that it was damp but not soaking wet, so that when you squeezed it, it still held together really well, but there wasn't a lot of water coming out of it. I then filled a small square pot. It was about 2.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches deep. And I lightly tamped down the soil with my fingers to remove any air pockets. I didn't press hard, but just lightly. So after soaking the seed, there was another little bit of confusion. Most online sources indicated that hollyhocks needed light to germinate, but the Baker Creek packet indicated that the seeds should be sown 1/4 inch deep, which I think is a little bit too deep if you have to have light reaching the seed. So what I did is I decided to do a bit of a hybrid approach. I placed the seed on top of the soil, then I sprinkled a very light dusting of dry soil over the top of the seed. And I used dry soil just because it's much easier to spread it evenly than if the soil was wet. Even though you can't see the seed, the light will still be able to get through that very thin coating of soil. And lastly, I gave the soil a nice spray of water to make sure that the top of the soil as well as the seeds were well moistened. If I was starting this seed normally, I would probably sow at least 2, maybe even 3 seeds per cell or pot. But since it was the single seed challenge, I used only 1 seed. Then I added a label and I placed the pot under the grow lights and I covered it with a clear cover to keep the moisture in. Now, the soil temperature under my grow lights with no supplemental heat is in the 21 to 22 degrees Celsius range, which is perfect for hollyhocks, whose ideal temperature is between 18 and 24 degrees. I must have done something right because the Baker Creek packet indicates that the seeds should germinate in 10 to 14 days. And guess how long it took for my little hollyhock to come up? 2 days. I was quite frankly amazed and really relieved. So once the seedling germinated, I removed the cover and off it went. Hollyhocks are fairly fast growers, and by mid-April, it was a great size, and I was actually starting to see roots growing out of the bottom of the pot, which meant that I should be potting it up. Now, I had read that hollyhocks do not like root disturbance, but we were nowhere near our last frost date yet, so the safer bet was to just pot it up into a larger pot so that it doesn't get root bound, and cross my fingers that this didn't shock it too much. At this point, the seedling was about 6 weeks old, and I potted it up into a solo cup that I had drilled some drainage holes into. When I took the seedling out of the pot, the roots looked amazing. A little too good, actually. I mean, any longer and they would definitely have been root bound. So ideally, I probably should have potted it up a week or so sooner, at around the 5-week mark. And I did make a note in my calendar to do that for next time. When potting up, I use the ProMix potting mix instead of the seed starting mix, and I moisten it in exactly the same way. I potted up the seedlings so that it was at the same level in the soil as it was before, and I left approximately a 1/2 inch or so clearance from the top of the soil to the rim of the cup so that I can easily water.
As for fertilization, I fertilized the seedlings with half-strength kelp fertilizer. It's an organic fertilizer, and I did this when the second set of true leaves just started to come out. And I think that would have probably been around the 3-week mark or so. After repotting, the hollyhock went back under the grow lights, and I didn't transplant it outdoors until the end of May. I think it was, I don't know, last week of May or so. So a couple of weeks after my last frost date. Now, I did want to transplant them earlier because they can take a little bit of chilly weather, but the problem was that I hadn't done the rabbit proofing in my raised bed area yet. And so I actually had to wait until that was done to basically transplant the majority of my seedlings outside into that raised bed area, including the hollyhocks. So they ended up going out a couple of weeks after I would have really liked them to go out. And the last thing is, since I wanted to really keep an eye on that hollyhock and I wanted it to be front and center in the best possible circumstances, not kind of tucked away in an ornamental bed amongst a whole bunch of other things, I put it in a raised bed instead of in my border.
By June 21st, the hollyhock was settling into its home, but it wasn't very big. Now, this could have been due to transplant shock, or it may have been the hot, dry weather we had. This area was completely renovated the previous year, and all of the raised beds were new, and the soil was new. And what I didn't realize until partway through the growing season was that the soil was a lot sandier than I realized. And also, because the beds were new, I didn't have any drip irrigation installed yet. So that could be a factor in how slowly the hollyhocks seemed to grow after it was transplanted. Since I had never grown hollyhocks before, maybe that's just what they did. Maybe they just sat there for a little while before continuing to grow, just as they get acclimated to the outdoor environment and their new growing conditions. So I took a bit of video on July the 6th, which was about 2.5 weeks later, and it really hadn't grown very much since that last bit of footage in mid-June. The bloom stalks finally started to emerge around the middle of July, and unfortunately I didn't get any video footage of this, but I did capture a screenshot on July 22nd, and it clearly shows that the stems are probably about 12 inches tall or so. It wasn't long after this, so last week of July, that it started blooming. And by August the 2nd, it looked like this. It was amazing. Not only that, but a couple of additional stems had come up and were also blooming. Here we are on September 5th, and it's blooming on its 4th stem. This next clip from September 30th didn't end up making it into a video, but it's perfect to include here. This is yet another stem. I think this is, the 4th or 5th stem I've gotten from that one single plant. And look how pretty it is. Look at that. So pretty. Still buds on the top here, and this stem, it goes all the way down. The base of the plant is right there, and this is, I believe, an heirloom variety, or at least an open pollinated variety. So there are lots of great seed pods here. I mean, right now I'm not going to collect anything because we just had a rain, they're all wet, but lots of seeds to collect, which I'm definitely going to do. Very exciting. So the hollyhock kept blooming all the way through October. I got some footage in the middle of October, and it continued to bloom until the end of the month, even into the beginning of November. The next footage I got is of the hollyhock on November the 9th, when the blooms had finally succumbed to the frosty weather. Most hollyhocks are biennial. They grow only foliage in the first year and then bloom in the second year. Now, this particular variety is a first-year bloomer, obviously. I'm wondering what's going to happen with it next year, though. Will it grow and bloom again? Is it one and done and that's it? I'm not really sure, so I'm really interested to find out what's going to happen. I also collected seeds, as I showed in the video clip previously, and since I didn't grow any other varieties that could cross-pollinate with this one, I'm hopeful that they'll come true to type. I'll be sowing some this year, as well as a few new varieties that I purchased. The other thing that I'm interested to see is if any have self-sown, because there were a lot of seeds on that one plant. So I'll be keeping an eye out in that corner of the bed to see if I have any Hollyhock seedlings coming up this coming spring.
And that's it. So I have to say that my Single Seed Challenge 2022 was a huge success this year. I had so much fun. I've never grown hollyhocks, as I mentioned, but boy, they are on the grow list from here on in. Now, the question is, would I do anything differently next year? And quite frankly, there's not a whole lot I would probably do differently because it just went so well. I may stake them next year. Now, Majorette Champagne Hollyhock is actually a dwarf variety that only does get about 2 feet tall, but I still had those kind of curvy stems happening. So I may add a little bamboo stake or something like that when I put the seedling in, just to tie up the shorter ones, and I'll definitely be adding stakes for any taller ones. The other thing that I'll probably do is also grow a few in my ornamental borders and also grow a few in the raised bed. So I might do a half and half type of thing. And I am definitely going to participate in the Single Seed Challenge again next year. I have already ordered a ton of seeds for some vegetables, for annuals, and actually quite a few perennials that I have never grown from seed before. I am going to have quite the challenge figuring out which one of those is going to be my Single Seed Challenge for 2023. Thank you so much for everyone that has joined me over the past, 10 months now? 11 months? 10 months. And I've had such a wonderful time, and I have learned so much, and every time I do a video, I learn something new. It's challenging, but very rewarding as well. I'm wishing you and your family a happy and healthy 2023, and there are going to be lots of gardening adventures this year in my garden and hopefully in your garden too. And I can't wait to get started. I can't wait for my seed orders to start coming in. There is going to be a lot to talk about. So I hope you join me then. Thank you again for joining me in these past few months, and I will see you next time. Bye.